There is no place on Earth quite like it. Here, the astonishing is commonplace. Turtles strike like snakes. And tarantulas share their homes with tiny frogs. This is a realm both beautiful and brutal, where adaptation is the key to survival. This is the wild Amazon.
The Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment has observed that the harvesting of wildlife in Guyana is done to satisfy varying demands ranging from food security to sport hunting. Too often, this has resulted in overhunting, making wildlife vulnerable in their habitats. As a result, the ministry established a national committee to oversee the management of wildlife in Guyana.
The Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment has recently commissioned a National Wildlife Management Steering Committee, which is comprised of individuals such as Major General Joe Singh and myself, who have been involved in wildlife management for decades, as well as representatives from NGOs such as Iwokrama, amongst others, and also the regulatory agencies that have anything to do with wildlife conservation and management.
This week on Dorado Shines, we will tell you more about the national committee that was established and how it plans to manage and protect wildlife.
This newly established committee was set up to basically have oversight and management of wildlife use in Guyana, which could mean anything from wildlife trapping in the case of the wildlife exporters, commercial use in the case of people that trap animals for domestic or international consumption, as well as scientific research in the case such as Panthera's program, where they do a lot of scientific research on our jaguar population. In countries such as ours, where you have an abundant source of wildlife, sometimes we take it for granted and we are not very wise in our stewardship of these resources, which could also lead in some cases to massive exploitation and rarely in extinction. So it's going to be a very wide-scale education and awareness and monitoring program. And I'm hopeful because in the case of the Guyana Marine Turtle Conservation Society, here again in the 60s when Dr. Pritchard came to Shell Beach as an undergraduate student to conduct research, sea turtles were abundant, and the massive decimation over the decades resulted in the loss of the olive ridley species. And it wasn't until that monitoring program was put in place that that species recovered. And here again, too, even the turtle hunters, who were the biggest threat at that time, were converted to become, in some cases, turtle wardens, and also were educated about why their slaughter of turtles was unacceptable, and were assisted to also find other avenues of income generation, for example, fishing or whatever. So I know, I'm speaking from experience, that education and awareness is capable of bringing about change. And I know that as Guyanese, we will do the right thing to ensure the survival of our wildlife species. So I would like to implore everyone to come on board. If we all work together, it will make it so much more faster to achieve success.
Additionally, the committee will communicate with various stakeholders, both local and international, including community monitoring, reporting and verification groups, Amerindian village councils, the Guyana Police Force, Panthera Corporation, and the United States Fish and Wildlife Service, respectively, to execute its mandate.
The intent of the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment to collaborate not only with local players such as our local NGOs and individuals, but also with international stakeholders such as Pantera, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Division. It's to basically have a very holistic sort of collaboration on the management and use of wildlife. In addition to this broad international and national collaboration, we are going even further and bringing on board representatives from the indigenous communities where they have benefited tremendously from training by Iwokrama in the case of the North Rupununi, or Conservation International in the case of the Kanuku Mountains, where, for example, they have local representatives who are trained in rangering, and they could become part of the national effort to do on-the-ground monitoring and regulation of wildlife use. In most cases where you have projects and you have funding and the funding runs out, the whole initiative collapses. Well, in this case, by bringing the local stakeholders on board very early in the embryonic stages, we are taking steps to make sure that there's sustainability in our activities.
In 2013, the Wildlife Regulations was passed, which states clearly the protocol involved for wildlife harvesting and its management, as well as a clear list of species that are protected and should not be harvested.
Under the regulations, it is an offense to intentionally harm wildlife. Point in case, we may have from time to time some species of wildlife, for example jaguars or anacondas, causing harm or nuisance to man and his activities. A lot of cleaning is going on in Georgetown and along the countryside now, and so we happen to see anacondas getting pulled up. First reaction might be to just kill it. This might not be the most appropriate thing all the time. Recently we may have seen a post on Facebook with an anaconda with a comment that it was killed, but with the reason being because it was causing a nuisance to farmers. In this case, the anaconda was eating their goat. So in some cases it could be acceptable, but we want to avoid such acts. This will have a detriment on our ecotourism industry, of course.
So this initiative by the ministry to have a management committee to have oversight of such use is very welcome.
The urgent need for a national land use policy is recognized by the government of Guyana, and it is hoped that the plan could act as a catalyst to speed the finalization of this policy and the development of integrated land use planning in Guyana. Government assisting miners. In an effort to reduce the cost of fuel for miners, the government of Guyana has granted a fuel import license to the Guyana Gold and Diamond Miners Association Trading Incorporated. Miners also have a concession on fuel where it only attracts 10% CIF excise tax. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Government assisting miners. Small and medium-scale operators benefit from duty-free access to all-terrain vehicles, or ATVs, excavators, bulldozers, and other machinery used in the mining industry. These waivers on duty are available to new entrants to the sector and for current miners based on production levels. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Guyana does not condone the reckless hunting of wildlife and has stringent laws that protect a number of endangered species.
A lot of people are not even aware that wildlife regulations exist, much less what they're comprised of, and the fact that species such as the jaguars and all other wildcats are protected. So, for example, the recent case of indiscriminate slaughter of jaguars and pumas, upon speaking to those parties that were involved in that terrible act, it became very aware that they were not aware that, pumas were protected. The assumption was that because they're allowed to be hunted in other countries, that could apply to Guyana, was clearly not the case in terms of our Guyanese situation. So we have developed a very comprehensive communication strategy which starts with the schools, both in the coastal areas as well as the hinterland.
Protecting these animals is high on the agenda of the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Environment. Globally, wildlife conservation has become an increasingly important practice due to the negative effects of human activity on animals and the environment.
In addition to that, we will also be having quarterly panel discussions comprised of persons who are very knowledgeable of the wildlife industry, community representatives, tourism representatives, to basically educate the public on other aspects of wildlife management and conservation. For example, people don't make a connection between a very healthy wildlife population to our fledgling tourism product. A lot of people that come to Guyana come here to enjoy our indigenous culture, to enjoy our wildlife attractions. And in fact, 1 in 3 visitors to Awakrama Reserve come away from that experience having witnessed the magnificent jaguar, which in itself is very invaluable. How many areas can actually boast of that? So in terms of having a very comprehensive awareness program, we're going to launch a program with billboards strategically placed around the city. These are billboards that belong to the Ministry of Natural Resources with our conservation message. We're also looking at support from the private sector as well. And 2 corporate donors have expressed an interest in also supplementing the ministry's billboards with some of their own. And we want to appeal to other private sector companies to show similar interest in protecting our national heritage and come on board.
The importance of managing and conserving Guyana's wildlife is at the forefront of Wildlife Management and Conservation Regulations (WMC), and is a key tool in the efforts of authorities to effectively regulate the sector.
We are hoping that we will educate people on the pertinent wildlife issues they need to be aware of. So when we start implementing our monitoring system, ignorance could not be used as an excuse for saying, well, I kill a puma because I thought that you were allowed to do it and I didn't realize it was not a protected species. So we want to use a very soft approach initially, focusing on awareness in a very enhanced capacity, and then also have that complemented by monitoring both with the national agencies such as the Environmental Protection Agency, the Wildlife Authority, as well as the indigenous and other wildlife rangers on the ground in the administrative regions where such wildlife exists.
The overall intention is for us to have guidelines, have, as it were, regulations, for us to develop systems, for us to develop as well as offenses and penalties and so forth, so that we can conserve and adequately manage our wildlife. It is important that we engage in conservation and sustainable management of the species. And if you look at the regulations, not only in terms for animal and fish, but also it goes to some plant species too. But in terms of the export, also this is to ensure that we put the necessary controls.
Government assisting miners. Miners in Guyana have access to 10% of their gold sales available in US dollars to assist in retooling and capital acquisition. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Processing of applications for public lands begins at regional offices. Clients are usually referred to the relevant regional office for initial communication and transactions concerning application within that particular region. Government assisting miners. A list of 19 suppliers of mining equipment and spares was approved for tax waivers on the importation of this equipment. This will reduce the cost of spares and critical supplies for miners and is an addition to items that are already being imported duty-free, such as pumps, flexes, and matting. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. The Environmental Protection Agency, the lead entity responsible for wildlife conservation, is putting a wide range of mechanisms in place to protect species at risk and deal with those engaged in the illegal wildlife trade.
Having these regulations is to fill the gap that the previous regulation would have had, which is the SPR of 1999, and to also specifically deal with wildlife trade, management of wildlife trade locally. This will work hand in hand with the proposed wildlife import and export bill. So we would more or less run the gamut on wildlife trade internationally and locally.
We also have wildlife harvesting seasons for those that, for example, engage in the wildlife harvest and export. So these sort of seasons also, we will be enlightening the public as well, because even though the harvesters are aware of them, sometimes the public will still go and trap species off season, and we want to, of course, ensure that these seasons that are set there because of scientific research saying, okay, look, you shouldn't harvest a particular type of bird, for example, during the nesting season when they're reproducing, because if you do that, you're going to make your population of that bird decline. Well, there are reasons for these closed seasons to allow that species to be able to reproduce and to increase its population. I know as Guyanese we love our bushmeat and we love our pepper pot made with, for example, bush cow, otherwise known as tapir. Well, I'm appealing to you to please not use bush tapir for your pepper pot, because tapirs take very long, 13 months to reproduce, and their reproduction rate is very slow. So when there's a massive harvesting of them and they're not allowed time to reproduce, of course, you will have a very dramatic decline in their population.
Guyana is a signatory to a convention that aims to ensure that international trade of specimens of wild animals and plants does not threaten the survival of the species in the wild.
One other consideration as well is that with the gold mining and forestry sectors building roads now to access their forestry or gold resource in areas which were previously inaccessible, those same roads are being used by a lot of hunters, both domestic as well as commercial. So we have to look at systems, how could we monitor those roads to ensure that vehicles going in there, for example, are not coming out with protected species. These are things that we'll need to get the hunters on board, get the companies that are building these roads on board to try and manage that. We're not saying don't hunt and stop everybody from selling meat. We're just saying be sensitive to these species whose populations are very fragile, as well as do not hunt under any circumstance these populations that are on the protected list.
Measures are also being put in place to specifically deal with persons hunting and gathering wildlife locally.
I want to encourage anyone who comes into contact with wildlife, whether they're hunting, whether they're exporting, whether they're selling it as meat, this regulation concerns them.
Illegal hunting will be addressed through the wildlife regulations, and this is through the agencies that are set up to monitor that. So, for example, if you're looking at what is the definition of illegal hunter, there's a closed season for the harvesting of certain birds. If you're going out there and trapping them or killing them during the closed season, yes, that would be considered illegal. I would also like to say that countries such as Trinidad, even Jamaica, have extremely stringent hunting seasons. And in some countries like Costa Rica, hunting is banned altogether. So another thing that we have to be careful about is these small Caribbean countries that have very stringent bans on hunting and trapping. We have to also ensure that our natural resources are not also being seen even more attractive to some of those hardcore hunters who might want to come into Guyana, for example, during their no-hunting season and disseminate our species.
Government assisting miners. The government of Guyana has set aside the sum of $1 billion Guyana dollars for a revolving mercury-free mining development fund as to provide low-cost financing to miners to adopt mercury-free and increased gold recovery technologies. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission.
Down in the southwest of Guyana, there's a place where the jungle just stops and opens up to a stretch of dry grasslands. This savanna region is called the Rupununi, and it's an ideal destination for serious ecotourists. Flights to the Rupununi depart from Guyana's capital, Georgetown, and they arrive in the village of Anai. The Rupununi is sparsely populated, and most people who live here are Amerindians, the original inhabitants of Guyana. Just behind the Anai airstrip is a good base camp for exploring the Rupununi. Most visitors stay in this converted ranch house, which now offers self-contained suites as well as camping facilities. Local Amerindians are training to be forest rangers and nature guides. Part of their project involves photographing hundreds of species that are found here. Frogs and snakes are common, and the reserve is home to nearly 500 bird species, including the harpy eagle. From the field station, catch a lift downriver to Turtle Mountain. Guides will take you deep into the rainforest, and you never know when you'll need to recall their lessons on traditional medicine and survival skills. An hour and a half and a rather steep climb later, this spectacular panorama is your reward. Meanwhile, back on the savannah, there's another small settlement where the grasslands, swamps and flood forest all meet on the Rupununi River. This ranch has the feel of an Amerindian village. Many places call themselves a birdwatcher's paradise, but few live up to their name like the Rupununi. When the forest floods during the summer rainy season, the roads become rivers. By boat, birdwatchers can easily reach places like Crane Pond. At sunset, this magical place is teeming with crocodiles. And of course, flocks of egrets, cormorants, and inhingas. Want to cross the savannah? Reaching more remote ranches can be an adventure indeed. To save time, there are flights from Anai. Or, depending on the season, try an overland jeep journey. But if you want a true Rupununi experience, hop on a bullet cart. It may be slow, but it's authentic, and there's no better way to take in the serenity of the savannah.
This pale-throated sloth prefers the security of the canopy and only comes to the ground once a week to defecate. When he does, he's limited to a crawl. The sloth lives solely on leaves, a low-calorie diet that provides little energy and is difficult to process. So he spends up to 18 hours a day resting and digesting. This sedentary lifestyle explains how the sloth got his name and his reputation for being lazy. Only the calls of a nearby female get him moving. With poor eyesight, he's reliant on his other senses to find her. Her lichen-covered fur makes her even harder to spot among the branches. It's also a cozy bed for her 3-month-old baby boy. He still relies on his mother for food and protection. It will be another 5 months before he's on his own. But she's ready to mate again. Sloth courtship is slow and graceful. But she may reject him with her baby still around. If these sloths mate successfully, the female will give birth in about 6 months, by which time her son will be independent. But what kind of future does he face? The sloth's home in the forest canopy is an uncertain refuge. Their lack of mobility makes it difficult to adapt to changing conditions.
Government assisting miners. The Guyana Mining School continues to train persons in entry-level skills for the mining sector, and this increases the pool of human resources available for miners. A message from the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission. Check us out on the internet for this and every episode of Dorado Shines. Just go to YouTube, search for Dorado Shines and start watching. Or like us on Facebook and receive instant updates. You've been watching Dorado Shines. Do join us again next week for another program. Until then, do remember, we all have a role to play in protecting the environment.